There's a quiet feeling that some people carry through their entire day. You wake up, you go to work, you answer messages, you do everything you're supposed to do. From the outside, your life looks completely normal. But inside, something feels strangely distant. It's not exactly sadness, and it's not exactly emptiness. It's more like you're moving through your life on autopilot, like you're present in every moment, but somehow not fully inside your own life anymore. And if this feeling has followed you for a long time, you might have started wondering something quietly to yourself. Why does it feel like everyone else is living while I'm just existing? If that question has ever crossed your mind, the truth might surprise you, because this feeling often isn't about motivation at all. In psychology, there's actually a very specific reason why some people slowly start feeling like they're only existing. And once you see it, you may start recognizing it in your own life. Maybe your days feel strangely repetitive. You wake up, go through your routine, finish the things that need to be done. You reply to people. You show up where you're supposed to show up. From the outside, it looks like you're functioning just fine. But internally, it often feels like you're watching your own life from distance. You move through conversations almost automatically. You smile when it's expected. You say the right things. Yet part of you feels slightly detached, like there's a thin layer of glass between you and the moment you're in. Sometimes you catch yourself staring at a wall, a screen, or the ceiling, not really thinking about anything, not overwhelmed with emotion, not even particularly sad, just blank. And what confuses you the most is that you can still do everything you're supposed to do. You can work, you can study, you can maintain relationships. But the feeling of truly being alive, that spark of excitement, curiosity, or emotional depth, feels distant, like something you remember rather than something you feel now. People around you might even describe you as calm, stable, easygoing. But what they don't see is the quiet weight of moving through life without fully feeling connected to it. And sometimes, in a quiet moment, a thought slips in that you rarely say out loud. Why does it feel like everyone else is living while I'm just passing through? If you've ever had that thought, there's something very important you should understand about this experience, because the way most people interpret it is completely wrong. And the real reason behind it often begins much earlier in life than people expect. If this experience feels familiar to you, there is something important you deserve to hear. You are not lazy, you are not broken, and you're not someone who has lost the ability to feel. What you're experiencing is something many psychologists recognize as a form of emotional shutdown. When the mind has been under pressure for a long time, stress, emotional overload, or environments that never felt completely safe, the nervous system sometimes does something very protective. Instead of staying in constant alarm, it slowly turns the emotional volume down. Not because you're weak, but because your brain has been trying to protect you from carrying more than it can handle. In other words, the feeling of just existing is often not a failure of motivation or personality. It's a survival response. And once you begin to understand how the brain and nervous system create this state, something powerful happens. The confusion starts to fade, and the story you've been telling yourself about what's wrong with you begins to change. To understand why this happens, it helps to look at something very simple about the human brain. Your brain's primary job is not to make you happy. Its primary job is to keep you alive. And to do that, your nervous system is constantly scanning the world around you for signs of safety or danger. Most people are familiar with the stress responses called fight or flight. When the brain senses a threat, it prepares the body to react quickly. Your heart rate increases, your focus sharpens, and your body gets ready to protect itself. But there's another response that receives far less attention. Freeze. This happens when the nervous system experiences stress or emotional pressure for such a long time that reacting constantly becomes too exhausting. So instead of staying in high alert forever, the brain shifts into a quieter strategy. It begins to lower emotional intensity. Less reaction, less feeling, less internal noise. Think of it like a smoke detector in a house that once caught fire. After that experience, the detector becomes extremely sensitive. It starts going off at the smallest hint of smoke, even something harmless like a candle. Now imagine that alarm going off again and again for years. Eventually, the system becomes overwhelmed, and the brain does something surprising. It doesn't keep turning the alarm louder. Instead, it starts dampening the entire system. The emotional signals become softer. The reactions become slower. And over time, life can start to feel muted, distant, like you're moving through it without fully touching it. From the outside, this might look like calmness or emotional stability. But internally, it often feels more like disconnection. Not because your mind stopped working, but because it learned that feeling everything at full intensity was simply too much for too long. And for many people, the roots of this adaptation didn't begin in adulthood at all. They often began much earlier in environments where their nervous system first learned how to survive. And for many people, this pattern didn't start in adulthood. It started much earlier, during the years when your nervous system was still learning what the world was like. For some people, childhood felt unpredictable. Maybe the emotional atmosphere in your home could change quickly. One moment things were calm, and the next moment there was tension, silence, or conflict. When you grow up in that kind of environment, your brain learns something very quickly. Stay alert. Stay careful. Don't react too strongly, because reacting too much might make things worse. So instead, you become very controlled, very watchful. You learn to read subtle changes in people's voices, the way a door closes, the tone of a conversation in the next room. Your nervous system becomes incredibly skilled at monitoring the emotional climate around you. Other people might not notice these small signals, but you do. For others, the environment wasn't necessarily loud or chaotic. It may have been something quieter, something harder to name. Emotional distance. Maybe feelings weren't talked about in your home. Maybe no one asked how you were doing inside. Maybe you learned early that your emotions were something you had to manage alone. In those situations, many children learn another strategy. They become the easy one, the one who doesn't create problems, the one who stays calm, the one who handles things quietly. And at the time, that strategy can be incredibly adaptive. It helps a child navigate an environment where emotional safety isn't always guaranteed. But over many years, something subtle can happen. When the brain repeatedly learns that strong emotions lead to stress, conflict, or loneliness, it may begin to reduce emotional intensity altogether. Not consciously, but gradually, feeling less becomes safer. And that's often how people arrive at adulthood, with this strange sensation of moving through life slightly disconnected from themselves. You can still function. You can still think clearly. You can still do what needs to be done. But the emotional spark, the sense of being fully present in your own life, feels dimmer than it once did. And when society looks at this from the outside, it often gives it the wrong name. People might say you've become unmotivated, or distant, or emotionally unavailable. Sometimes they assume you just don't care enough. But what they're seeing on the surface is only the final result of something much deeper happening inside the nervous system. Because what looks like indifference is often exhaustion. What looks like emotional distance can actually be a form of protection. And what feels like numbness isn't always the absence of feeling. Sometimes it's what happens when your mind has carried too much for too long, and the only way to stay stable was to quietly lower the emotional volume. In other words, the experience of just existing is often misunderstood, not as a survival strategy, but as a personality flaw. And once you begin to see that difference, something important starts to shift. Because many of the traits you may have criticized in yourself might actually be connected to strengths your mind developed along the way. And this is where something surprising often appears. Many people who feel like they're just existing have developed abilities that others rarely notice. When your nervous system spends years paying close attention to emotional environments, it naturally becomes very skilled at reading people. You might notice subtle shifts in someone's tone of voice that others miss. You may sense tension in a room long before anyone else realizes something is wrong. You've learned to observe carefully, to think deeply before reacting. Some people develop a strong sense of empathy because they understand, on a very personal level, how heavy invisible emotions can feel. Others become excellent problem solvers. They spent so much time navigating complexity that their minds automatically look for patterns, connections, and meaning. In many ways, experiences that once felt overwhelming quietly train the brain to become incredibly perceptive. But here's the paradox. The same awareness that allows you to understand people deeply can also make the world feel more exhausting. When your mind constantly notices emotional details that others overlook, it can feel like carrying extra information everywhere you go. You see more. You feel more beneath the surface. You think more deeply about what's happening around you. And sometimes that level of awareness can make ordinary life feel heavier than it appears to others. Which is why many people who develop these abilities also learn something else along the way. They learned how to protect themselves. And one of the most common ways the mind protects itself is by building what we might call emotional armor. Not the kind you can see, but the kind that slowly forms through experience. Over time, your nervous system learns small protective habits. It becomes careful about how deeply it feels, careful about how much it reveals, careful about how vulnerable it allows itself to be. And for a long time, that armor serves an important purpose. It helps you move through difficult environments. It keeps overwhelming emotions from flooding in all at once. It allows you to stay stable, even when life feels heavy. In many ways, that armor helped you survive moments that might have been far more painful without it. But armor is designed for battle, not for everyday living. Imagine trying to walk through a quiet garden while wearing a full suit of armor. You're protected, yes, but everything becomes harder to feel. The warmth of the sun, the softness of the grass, the gentle breeze on your skin. And many people who feel like they're just existing aren't empty inside. They're simply still wearing armor their nervous system built years ago. Armor that once protected them, but now makes it harder to fully experience the life around them. And the beautiful thing about healing is that it doesn't ask you to throw that armor away all at once. Healing rarely happens by forcing yourself to suddenly feel everything again. In fact, trying to push emotions too quickly can sometimes make the nervous system tighten its defenses even more. Real healing tends to be much quieter than that. It begins with small moments where your mind slowly realizes that not every place is dangerous, and not every emotion has to be overwhelming. Sometimes it's a calm conversation with someone who truly listens. Sometimes it's a peaceful moment when you realize your body can finally relax, even if just for a few seconds. Sometimes it's simply the awareness that what you've been experiencing has a name, that your mind wasn't failing you, it was protecting you. Little by little, those moments send a new message to your nervous system. A message that says, the constant battle is not happening right now. And when the brain starts to believe that, even in small ways, it begins to loosen the armor it once needed to survive. Not all at once, but gradually. And as that happens, something many people thought they had lost forever can begin to return. The ability to feel present in their own life again. If you spend a long time feeling like you're just existing, it can be easy to believe something inside you is missing. But the truth is often the opposite. Your mind adapted in ways that helped you endure situations that were confusing, overwhelming, or emotionally heavy. It learned how to stay steady when things around you didn't always feel steady. That doesn't make you broken. It means your nervous system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you. And the fact that you're here, reflecting on these patterns, trying to understand yourself a little more deeply, that already says something important about you. It means the part of you that wants to feel alive again is still very much there. You're not someone whose story stopped at survival. You are someone who survived long enough to begin understanding yourself. And for many people, that moment of understanding is the very first step towards something new, towards slowly stepping out of survival mode and back into life. If parts of this experience felt quietly familiar to you, then you're definitely not alone. There are many thoughtful, deeply reflective people who have spent years carrying these feelings without ever really talking about them. And this channel is a space for those kinds of conversations about the hidden patterns of the mind, the quiet ways we adapt, and the gentle process of healing. If you'd like to explore more of these ideas together, you're always welcome here. Consider subscribing, and if you feel comfortable, share in the comments. What part of your experience finally made a little more sense today?